everybody, it's Michelle, and today I'm going to be making another card for you guys using the March 2019 card kit from SSS Stamp. And there was somewhat of a St. Patrick's Day theme to this card kit. However, their main stamp set, called Amazing, it's just sort of an encouragement set, and it's not really so much St. Patrick's Day. So I thought we would do a card today that's not St. Patrick's Day themed. However, I might use a couple of the stickers, maybe just some of the gold hearts or something from the sticker set. I'll decide as I go on that, but I know I definitely want to use some of the sparklets, and there are plenty in there that doesn't necessarily need to be St. Patrick's Day to use these to help make your card beautiful. So the first thing I'm going to do is assemble my card base, and I'm just going to be using a card base that I made from some cream colored cardstock. This is basil cardstock in the color Buttermints. And then I've got a cream colored pattern paper that I want to add just to the front and keep the inside plain, but we've still got that cream color. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere that on there, and this is just my Miss Sparkle and Company that I got from Joann tape runner, and you can use any tape runner or any other adhesive that you prefer. And I'm just going to make sure to get that right out to the edge, on every edge, so that I don't have any of my corners peeling up in the long run. And I'm just going to adhere that down to the front of my card base. And this is an A2 card base. I had my little pattern paper here cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And for the card base, I did 4 1/4 by 11 and then scored it at 5 1/2 for a top folding card. I'm just going to set that aside for now while we work on a panel on the front. And I'm really excited about this. This is using my Amazing Stamp Set here from SSS Stamp. And I'll include the links below for you guys, as well as a link for the kit and a subscription too if you guys would like to subscribe. I find that it's an excellent deal to subscribe. You get so much product for so much cheaper than it would all cost you separately. So for my front panel, I'm using Bristol Smooth Cardstock by Strathmore, and I'll leave you guys a link to that as well. I am in love with this cardstock. It is so smooth and it makes ink blending so easy. And I have started acquiring a few colors of the Distress Oxide inks, and I am loving those. And I wanted to do a little bit of ink blending with some embossed resist. So we're going to try that today and see how it turns out. So I've taped my panel into position where I want it in my MISTI here, and I've come in from the edge a little bit just so that my stamps can overlap the edge. And I'm going to go over my panel with my anti-static powder tool. I'm using the one by EK Tools with the brush tip. They also have one that's in a cloth bag that you can just dust like a little pillow over your surface. Either one will work. It's just powder to help deactivate the static cling on the surface of your cardstock. That way you won't get your embossing powder sticking to other areas where you don't want it. So I'm going to ink up my stamps with Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink for our embossing powder to stick to. And then press that down. And with that held into position in my MISTI, I can go ahead and do that a second time. Okay, so I'm going to take that out Now I'm going to sprinkle on my embossing powder, and I'm using the clear. The reason I'm using the clear is I wanted the fine detail, and I didn't have white in the fine detail. But like I said, you can use clear or white. I like that the clear shows through the color of the cardstock behind. So if you wanted to do this in clear on a colored cardstock, then you could have that embossed resist showing through the color of your cardstock behind. And I'm going to heat set that with my heat tool. And I've got a new heat tool that I wanted to show you guys. It's the Wagner. I've seen a lot of card makers using this, and now I understand why. I had to buy a new one just because my other one died on me, and I went ahead and got the one I've seen everyone using, and I really see why. It's a great heat gun, and I'll leave a link to that for you guys too. And I'm going to give that just a second to cool to make sure that our embossing is good and dry. And one of my images here I wanted to reuse to stamp a second time. So I'm just going to do that separately now that we've got the rest of it done. And you could just do this with a block if you wanted to, but I'm going to go ahead and use my Misty again because I do want to double stamp that Versamark ink and make sure that it's nice and solid. Okay, so I'm going to use this one here over again. And I'm just going to go ahead and pick that up. My other stamps are still on my Misty, but I'm only going to ink up this one. And again, I'm going to coat that with my clear embossing powder and heat set it. Okay, so for my card, I'm going to use these images to represent flowers. I thought these images would be perfect as flowers. I think they're just beautiful. I think they would also be good fireworks for some sort of celebration card or something like that. Okay, so I want to do one more thing with embossing. I'm going to take my Ranger Emboss It pen, and I'm just going to color in the center of these two that have the wide open center. If you wanted to, you could use some of these solid stamp circles, but none of them fit exactly, and I didn't really want it to overlap. I want it to be just the size of the center. So let's see. I might better do my anti-static powder tool again, just to make sure nothing sticks where we don't want it. So for the center of those two, I want to make those gold. So I'm going to color that in with my Emboss It pen, and then sprinkle it with gold embossing powder. I'm actually using a gold tinsel powder by Ranger. It's got a little bit of a glitter sparkle to it. And I'm just going to clean up my edges a little bit here before I heat set it. Make sure I get that the way I want it. And I do kind of like that little bit of a free form edge from where we just drew it on. Okay, so our embossing is all done and it's cool now. So we can start doing some ink blending and work on that background. And you'll see where those flowers or whatever you want to use these designs as, like I said, fireworks or anything. But you'll see how they resist the ink blending when we start putting that on. And I'm going to be using a couple of colors of Distress Oxide. I've got Victorian Velvet and Aged Mahogany. And I may use a little bit of the regular Distress ink in Picket Fence. I needed a little bit of white and I hadn't got a white in the Oxide yet. I'm just starting to buy a few colors of these so far. But we'll see what we decide as we go along and work on our ink blending. And I've got my glass cutting board underneath me here. Maybe one day I'll invest in the glass media mat. I'm not sure. There are some aspects of it I'm not too sure if I'm going to love. But for now I've got my glass cutting board. A slick surface is really good for ink blending. Instead of that surface just grabbing your ink when you start off the edge of your paper, you can then blend it back onto your paper later as you go. So let's get started in this and see the magic of that embossing come through. First, I think what I'm going to do is get a little bit of tape for my fingers to keep from getting the oils from my fingers onto my card here. And then I'm just going to start blending with my Victorian Velvet. Back with a dry cloth and I'm going to buff off my embossing powder, and any of that ink that's laying on top of there is just going to buff away, showing through that white underneath. And those white images really start to pop. And I'm going to put some little splatters and sprinkles on there. I'm going to do some more of my Victorian Velvet. And I'm just going to put that onto an acrylic block. I'm going to wet it with I'm going to squeeze out a little bit from my water pen here. Just enough to get it moving. And then just flick that onto my card. And then I can do some more sprinkling, and I'm going to use a little bit of a darker color this time. I'm using Aged Mahogany. And again, just smoosh that right onto my acrylic block and wet it with a water brush. And just flick some of that on as well. And I want to do a few sprinkles in white. We'll give it a try and see if it shows up. This is just the regular Distress ink. So it's not going to be as opaque as the Oxide would be. I wish I had the Oxide in Picket Fence, but I'm just going to work with what I've got. I'm going to go ahead and dry it with my heat tool so that I know it's completely dry, and then I can buff it off again to get it off of my embossing. And when that's good and dry, we can buff it again and get all the sprinkles off of our embossing. Okay, so now the sprinkles are off of our embossing, and we're just playing with this color layer by layer to see what else we can do to add to that effect. And you can come back over and soften those out. I'm going to give my flowers some stems, and I'm using an Arteza Real Brush pen in the color Crocodile Green. I chose watercolor because I can draw my stems and go straight through my other embossed flowers, and that's going to wipe off of our embossing just like our ink blending did. That way we can give the illusion that that stem goes behind the other flower. So I'm going to start with my swirly flower here and make a stem coming down like that. One from this flower here. And then I'm just going to come back and add more layers wherever I want a little bit of darker color, because these markers will darken and layer. And buff it off of our embossed areas again. And you might have to buff it kind of firmly on some of them, but you can see it does buff off so that the stems appear to be behind, and I think that is just gorgeous. So now for some finishing touches, I want to put one of my green gems in the center of this flower here, and I think that is so cute. And maybe a few of these clear faceted gems throughout the card. And I think I'm going to put a couple of gold hearts also. And it seems like the flowers kind of go in a diagonal path here, so I'm going to keep my hearts consistent with that. Okay, so now I want to stamp a sentiment on the inside of my card. So on the outside we've got, have I told you lately that you're amazing? So on the inside I'm going to put you're fantastic, amazing, and incredible. So I'm going to just get this one on my acrylic block. I think I'm going to ink this up with aged mahogany. And I want just a little bit on the inside of what's on the outside. So I'm going to stamp one of the flowers. And I'm doing that in the Victorian velvet. I'm going to draw a little stem for that. And then I think I'll take my tiniest dot. And we'll put a little flower center with the aged mahogany. I think I want a couple more faceted jewels. Okay, so now we're ready to put it on our card front. And I want to pop that up a little bit, so I'm going to use foam tape. And I wanted to show you guys this little roll of the Scotch foam mounting tape that I got at Walmart. And I'll leave a link to this as well. This is the same Scotch mounting tape that you see in the gigantic rolls. But if, like me, you're not ready to invest in something quite so large, I'm not sure that I would even use it enough to justify having a roll that big. So I found these smaller rolls and I think that that's great. I can try it out, see how I like it, see how much I end up using. If I end up using it often, I may go ahead and invest in the larger roll. But in the meantime, if you're just not ready, this is a great option. This is a great way to start in with that foam. And this is the wide one. I think it may be an inch wide. It is 1 inch wide. Okay, so there we've got that dimension on there. And that's going to help hold our panel flat if we have any warping from the water that we used or from the heat or anything that we've done. And I love this mounting tape because you don't have to pick all those individual little backers off when you use all of those tiny little tabs. And there is our card. I think that turned out beautifully. And I like that our sentiment on the inside sort of is a little throwback to what's on the front. And you still have room over here to write a handwritten message on the inside. And I think it turned out great. This is one of my first attempts with the ink blending and the spattering and all of that. So I was just playing around and experimenting to see what I could come up with. And I think I'm happy with the way it turned out. You guys, leave a comment below and let me know if you liked it as well. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Give me a like over on my Facebook page. And be sure to join our Facebook group, Craftie Minds. Also, follow me on Pinterest and Instagram. And don't forget to visit my blog. I'll have the links to all of those in the description below, so be sure and check them out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.